The problems of today are the jobs of tomorrow. Our world has changed a lot in the 25 years I have worked. I'm going to take you through what we have on a very helicopter overview of this, but I'm also going to say this is find something you're passionate about. When I grew up in Mumbai, which is called Bombay back then, after us, we played. We never thought about career, we never thought about anything other than just playing. Today the world has become more competitive, and all of you in private schools and attend classes, tuitions, engage in all these things, extracurricular activity, with the hope that your parents hope that you'll find something you're passionate about. And as an adult, you will spend most of your time around your life will be related to your work. And so it should be a place that you're happy, and it should be a place where you're doing something that you love, because ultimately that's going to be the place you're going to be spending a lot of your time around it. And whatever you choose to do, pick something you're passionate about. Today my talk is something that I am extremely passionate about, and that's the environment. In 1992, when I decided to do environmental engineering and law, I was one of the 12 students at the University of Melbourne. It was the first or second batch that was doing a postgraduate degree. There were no undergraduate degrees. They were 2 years later, they started the first undergraduate degrees, which means that after year 12, you could do environment. And back then, the three big engineering disciplines were mechanical, which is about cars, machines, things like that. It's about chemical, all the factories, and civil, which is building houses, bridges, roads, etc. Today, environmental engineering is already bigger than all of these. And that is simply because the problems of today are the jobs of tomorrow. We are at a crisis point. Today's talk, I'm going to tell you little stories, parables, facts, to give you an insight and understanding on the challenges we face today. The first three sections of this talk, basically the Blue Marble, Noah's Ark, and 2050, these are all about our role to protect the thread of life of all humans as well as species that live on this planet, and to share this planet with the rest of all creation that's on Earth. And the next two sections, the lungs and the largest waterfall on Earth, talk in terms of very simple science about how the human body functions and how the planet as a single living organism functions. So what we do is we manage to compare how the human body works with how the planet actually works, so you can get an understanding of why, if any of these things fall apart, we have problems. And the last section is going to be on the jobs of the future, just how different the world I inherited from my parents is going to be the one you inherit from yours. And I really want to say it's a very, very whole new world, as you will say. So in 1972, this photograph, which is probably the most published and transmitted photograph on the planet, is the Blue Marble. It was taken from Apollo 17. It changed the way we thought about our own planet. We live on a tiny, fragile blue marble, wrapped, literally cotton wool wrapped in a fine layer of atmosphere, and is floating alone in the vast expanse of space. And we came up with three words: fragile, finite, and alone. And you may have heard about people like Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson who've actually taken their space shuttles. Well, they've only just gone outside our planet. They haven't even gone outside our solar system. There is no planet B. Our technology today does not give us the ability to take all of you and everything that's on this planet to another planet. So what we are saying today to everybody is we've got to protect this with everything we have. What we found is that our environment is so fragile. If we destroy that, we are now destroying the cotton wool and protection we have on this planet. We have finite water, finite air, finite resources, finite land. And we can't keep taking from it on an infinite matter. It's like having a bank account and just withdrawing and withdrawing and withdrawing. Ultimately, you are not going to have anything left to give to the next generation. All we know from this was that there is no planet B, and this actually became the symbol of the entire environment movement. So around 1992, I stumbled across this book called Our Common Future, and it was a stocktake of the planet that my generation would inherit. It was made by the then Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Brundtland. She pulled together all the scientists, the accountants, the lawyers of the world and said, what do we have in terms of land, food security, climate change, forest species, and what are we going to leave the world in 2025? And that was what that generation gave to mine. And what I'm talking about today is a stock take of what my generation will leave and what the world's going to look like in 2050. And so when I picked it up, we had different problems. We had a hole in the ozone layer, which was created by refrigerants. What the ozone layer does is that when the sunlight comes in, it pulls out all the ultraviolet harmful rays. If it doesn't do that, we have skin cancers. So the hole over the Antarctic created enormous amounts of skin cancers in countries like Australia. We had issues with the ice caps melting, which are still happening. We had a world population increasing at 80 million a year, which is still happening. We knew the forests were being removed, and we knew the carbon dioxide was going up. And what they said to us was, what will the population be in 2025? How will we feed the world? How will we provide water and electricity? Back then, a third of the world was not on the grid. Guess what? Today, a third of the world is still not on the grid. That means they're still not connected to energy, and they don't use any of it that we are now claiming is putting all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And we asked the questions, how are we going to protect the forest? How are we going to protect the species, the oceans, and everything that lives in them? This is a painting of Noah's Ark. It talks about 40 days and 40 nights of rain, which flooded the earth. And Noah was entrusted to take 2 of each species to protect the thread of life. This, to me, was one of the most valuable parables, because if Noah had decided to take 4 elephants, he may have had to throw out the tigers or the lions. We always see this in the environment as we humans are Noah. And what we've got is the Ark, which is planet Earth. We've got nothing else to go, and we've got to basically protect this. And so today we are modifying the Ark for one species, that's the human race. And we're throwing out every other species. And to us, this is a very grave concern. The other thing in this painting, which I found very fascinating, is they actually have 2 unicorns in it. And this was put there to represent the species that would be extinct. We will have extinction, we know that, but what we don't want to do is a mass extinction of species to suit our purpose. And so the sad truth is that today, environment protection is all about modifying the planet to house more and more humans, minimizing the impacts on other species. I think we have an equal right. This snake is the golden lancehead viper, and it lives in an island called Snake Island, which is about 20 miles off South Pole up in Brazil. So that's about 3 times the distance of what Elephanta is from Mumbai. No humans are allowed on this island, except for scientists who've got permission to go there. Well, around the 1950s, Snake Island had humans on it. It had a lighthouse, it had banana plantations, and this snake has no predators. Just like on this planet, humans have no predators. And so what it did was its numbers grew. It started to eat all the rats, all the mice, and when it ran out of those, it morphed and it started to climb trees and kill all the birds. It got to a point that it got so infested with snakes, which is why it's called Snake Island, you couldn't take a step on this 430,000 square meter island without seeing a snake. It has also got to a point where it got to be a very efficient killer. Because there were so many snakes and so few rats and mice and birds, if it killed a bird and the bird fell, another snake would take it. So it had to be able to kill the bird and had to die instantly. If the venom of the golden lancehead viper falls on your hand or on human skin, it will melt human skin. That's how potent it is. That's one of the reasons you're not allowed there. The second reason is a bit more dire. What the golden lancehead viper did was it ate the rats, it ate the mice, and it ate the food of the next generation. This is a concern we have. We are depopulating the oceans of all the fish they have with electronetting. We're wiping out the forest for palm oil. And so the golden lancehead viper ate the food of the next generation, and after it finished eating the food of the next generation, it decided to gang up and eat each other. And so then it killed its own gene pool. That means it became susceptible to disease. In 50 years, the golden lancehead viper is critically endangered. There are so few golden lancehead vipers, there's around 700 to 1,000 left in the world. It had nothing to eat it, but it killed itself. And this is a fear we have as a parable of what could happen to planet Earth if we manage to wipe out the gene resources and we wipe out the food resources of the next generation. So we are very concerned about the population of the ocean. We are very, very concerned about deforestation, which I'll talk about more. But these are some of the reasons. We have to give you all the tools of survival. This is our job to do. I talked about finite, and our planet has 15 billion hectares of land. That's all we have, of which 5 billion hectares is the glaciers, the Sahara Desert, and we really can't live on it, which means we are left with 10 billion hectares, of which 3.7 billion or 37% are the magnificent forests, the rainforest, the Amazon, etc. We have to think that that's not ours. We have to share that with the rest of the species on this planet. And that being the case, we are left with around 10 billion hectares, including 37% of forest. We also know this, that to actually keep one human alive, you need 1 hectare of land to provide the food, the fuel, the shelter, and everything they have. And people say, yeah, someone living in rural India doesn't consume the same as someone living in Mumbai, in a big apartment with 2 cars. But the person living in Mumbai doesn't want to live like the person in Pedro, it's the other way around. So what's happening is everybody wants more. Our planet is geared towards more and more people consuming more and more. And if you do the math, in very simple terms, 1 hectare per person, if we get to 10 billion, then there's no land left for anybody else other than humans. That means if any species does not directly serve human purpose, it's got to go. And that is a terrible crime for us. We're looking at this from the point of view that if the dolphins compete with us for fish, and they're eating our fish, we'll kill the dolphins to keep their numbers in check. And that is a terrible choice as well. And this is where the problem with 2050 is. We have estimated that we will be 10 billion at 2050. Today, in about 2 years, we'll be at 8 billion. And we have already got to a point where, it's really starting to stretch what we can keep and can't keep. There is a really interesting number here, and this is this 10 billion, is that if you actually go on the internet and you look at population graphs, they all platter out at 10 billion. And there's a reason. The reason is simple, we can't have more. And nobody talks about it. So I'm going to talk to you now about climate change in very simple terms. If any of you leave a car in the sun, you will know that when you get back, it's going to be extremely hot. It's the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is that when light comes through the atmosphere to our planet and it hits the Earth, it then lets up infrared and it breaks up into the spectrum. Infrared is the largest wavelength and it gets trapped by glass, which is why the car gets hot inside. Now, if we didn't have the carbon dioxide, which acts as this glass over our planet, we would have an unlivable planet. So the greenhouse effect is actually essential for our survival. But if you can think about this, you've left your dog in a car, you normally leave the window up a little bit so there's a bit of cool, it doesn't get really hot. If you keep winding this glass up, it gets hotter and hotter. And that's what we're doing by putting more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We're basically winding this window up. Our planet has 2 lungs. Everybody knows the first lung, which is the green lung, the forest. The second lung is actually bigger, it's the oceans. So in 2019, before COVID, we put out 42 billion tons of carbon dioxide. The forest sucked up 12, the ocean sucked up 14. 55% of all our excesses are taken up by the forest and the oceans. And the problem is that the balance is all going and building up this, winding up this window, putting that carbon dioxide layer thicker and thicker. And I'm going to now explain why this is in terms of the human body. So in the human body, in very simple terms, oxygen comes into the body, goes through the lungs, gets into your blood, dissolves in your blood, goes all the way down to various parts of your body, and it meets up with food, which is carbon. Oxygen plus carbon gives us carbon dioxide, which basically gives us the energy to live. That carbon dioxide is then dissolved in the blood, comes back through the veins, back to the lung, and out. The forests basically do, and the oceans do the same thing. They're taking out the oxygen, they're taking out the carbon dioxide and putting back oxygen. Herein lies the first problem. If you have a ruptured lung or you have a broken lung, you can't run. Sometimes you can't even walk. It's why very often you see old people, they walk a little bit and they stop and sit. That's because they can't get the oxygen in, they can't get the energy at that speed. We are taking out the forest, we've taken out 17% of the green lung already. As far as the blue lung is concerned, it's even more fascinating. So we've got, if you ever take Coca-Cola, and you put it into a handi, and you just let it go flat, and then you heat it up, you start to see bubbles again. And the reason is simple, is that when liquids are warmer, they absorb less gases. We are worried that we heat up the oceans, they're going to absorb less carbon dioxide. They're currently doing approximately 30% of our excesses, and the oceans get up. That is a problem. The second problem we have, which is also very dire, is the fact that the oceans have taken so much carbon dioxide since the Industrial Revolution that the pH of the oceans has dropped. So if you do your acidic scale, the pH of the oceans are usually 8.2, it's gone down to 8.1. That doesn't sound like a lot. pH is a logarithmic scale. That means that in the last 100 years, our oceans are 30% more acidic than they were. And why this is a problem is that acids, again, absorb less gases. So we are worried that we're now taking out the second lung as well. And if we take out both the lungs, you can't ask somebody to run faster with a ruptured lung. It doesn't happen. That's what we're asking the planet to do. I'm now going to talk about the circulatory system. The circulatory system of our planet works on ocean currents. So we have the Gulf Stream, which is pretty much comes from the equator. It moves across the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and as it moves across, giving up heat, it evaporates the water. And when you evaporate water from seawater, it becomes more and more salty. Now, science teaches you that salt water is always denser than fresh water. And so this starts to dip. Then it hits Europe, and it brings to Europe the power of 1 million power stations and keeps it warm and allows Europe to have the wonderful climate it has in Western Europe. And then it turns back and it hits somewhere between Denmark and Greenland at about, I think it's around close to a few hundred meters below the sea. It drops to the bottom of the ocean. And with it, it takes oxygen to everything that lives on the bottom of the ocean. So it's like the heart. Now, what's really interesting is that if you took the Ganges, the Amazon, and every single river and lake in the world, and you added all that water and you multiplied it by 15, that's what falls in 1 second. In 1 single second in the Gulf Stream, 15 times all the fresh water falls to the bottom of the ocean, and it takes with it oxygen, and this cycle is a 1,000-year cycle. So the problem we have today is the melting ice caps. And what's happening now is there's so much water that's falling in from the melting ice caps, which is all fresh water. Now, fresh water is lighter than seawater. And it's adding up to this to such an extent that the mechanism by which the Gulf Stream drops to the bottom of the ocean is based on its density. It's heaviest because it's become salty. The second thing is that water has maximum density at 4 degrees centigrade. So if it's at 4 degrees centigrade, it drops. Now with all this water that's being added as fresh water, and the fact that this is all cooling the Gulf Stream, it's gone down below 4 degrees centigrade, and it's not as salty. It's actually slowed down by over 10%. And this is like having a heart with a clogged artery, because the Gulf Stream is the pulmonary artery of our planet. It now has this horrible layer, which is basically throttling the flow of blood, which is the Gulf Stream forming down and taking the oxygen to various parts of the body. So you know, like if someone faints, it's when oxygen stops going to their brain. If someone's body goes dead, it's because oxygen stopping going to the parts of the body. We're now messing with the circulatory system of the planet, and this to us is a major, major concern. As for climate change, the Gulf Stream and these streams actually, the ocean currents control our climate. I'm now going to talk about the jobs of tomorrow. We will continue as humans to be the most dominant species on this planet. And the immediate jobs we have been looking at are the quest to feed the human race, provide energy, provide it for an ever more demanding population, yet protecting resources and the gene pool of other species as best we can. So today we take impact assessments to develop projects, we look at mitigation. It's given us fields of ecologists, botanists, aquatic ecologists, marine biologists, mapping, GIS. We've gone into computer software which does all our tree counting. We do environmental impact assessment before we start anything. And it's a growing field, it's only been new. The race to reduce carbon dioxide emissions has opened up the field of renewables. And renewable energy, such as solar, only happens when the sun shines, or wind energy when the wind blows. This usually gives us what we call a capacity factor, and it's only about 25%, which means that if we want to have it 24/7, we need batteries. We need other forms of energy there to do this. And to make batteries, to give you a good example, is when we started out building cars, we built them in steel. Then we moved on to all these fancy alloys to make it lighter. Batteries have the lowest energy density. So what's happening here is now we're going backwards, and we're now putting the heaviest material in our fuel tanks, which are the batteries. So it's given us a whole new world, because now we are searching things on the periodic table that may, I'm ashamed to say, I picked this up in my postgraduate years, that there were chemicals or things on the periodic table which are probably now termed critical minerals I had never heard of before. Neodymium, praosodium, things like that. And these are the chemicals of the future. This is what China controls 85 to 90% of. We cannot build batteries lighter without these minerals. This is what all our air turbines for the wind turbines are built out of. So it's opened up a whole new world of mining. It's opened up a whole new world of mineral processing. The other big hope has been hydrogen. All fuels are either hydrogen or carbon, and that is with good reason. Every other chemical on the periodic table gives you oxide which is toxic or solid. So you can't have a car that you then put this chemical in and it suddenly forms a solid oxide, because your engine will be bust. Or you can't have something that's going to put something that's toxic. Unfortunately, the carbon is now creating another problem for us. It's collecting and winding up the window. So we're looking at hydrogen, and therein lies some more problems. Hydrogen is number one on the chemical table. It can go through the smallest crack in any pipe. It can escape through any flange which you have in the pipes. The second problem is it can even go through pipe. We can only transport it at a few degrees above absolute zero, which means that we have to use enormous amount of compression and liquefaction, which costs money, to make this into a liquid. And to add to all of that is the cost of hydrogen then goes up. We're already struggling to have diesel and petrol. Green hydrogen, which is hydrogen made out of renewable energy. So if they take a solar panel, they plug two electrodes, and you convert the hydrogen and oxygen from water, costs 10 times the price of petrol. And if you can imagine that today we're struggling with people paying for petrol, how the hell are they going to pay for this, which is 10 times more? And we already have a third of the people off the grid. So to us, this is also a challenge to keep this transition in phase. So many of us are now looking at converting hydrocarbons, so that's petrol, gas, coal, into hydrogen, and capturing the carbon dioxide. So now we have a problem, what we're going to do with that. And we're looking at trying to bury it and probably leave it for someone else to sort out, just like the waste problem. But we've got to do, as I started earlier, we've got to do around, we're at 42 billion tons already, going to 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide, and the oceans and the forests are only doing 26. So to do 16 billion tons is more than the world trade by about 10 times. And we haven't got a tanker built yet that does this. The technology race that we're in is so daunting. And that's where the problems are going to be, is that we are looking out, this is where the jobs are going to be in this technology race. Anyway, so we're going to need scientists, lawyers, engineers, communication experts, teachers, accountants, all the disciplines thinking about working with the planet and not against it. We need to learn to change our values to protect the future and the tools of survival for your generation. And this is really critical to us. I have run out of time. I'd like to end with a little nursery rhyme which features in my second book. Learn what does the planet need, then work will seek you out. For these are jobs that must be done, that there is no doubt. If you find something that you want to do, which is about environment, it's going to be something we need to do.